Hello, dear students. This is your teacher Alejandra, and this is the class of week number 7, non-defining relative clauses. Non-defining relative clauses tell us more about someone or something, but the information in these clauses does not help us to define what we're talking about. Look at the example. Gorillas, which are large and originated in Africa, can sometimes be found in zoos. This is a non-defining relative clause. Here we are giving general information about gorillas. Okay? The non-defining relative clause tells us something more about gorillas in general, but they don't give us specific information. If the non-defining relative clause were removed from the sentence would still be grammatically correct. It means that we can remove the non-defining relative clause and the sentence would still make sense. For example, gorillas can sometimes be found in zoos. Composition of the non-defining relative clauses. Gorillas, which are large and originating in Africa, can sometimes be found in zoos. Here we have the subject, the relative pronoun, here we have the verb, and the rest of the non-defining relative clause. And then we have more information about gorillas. Examples. Example number 1. John's mother, who lives in Spain, has 6 grandchildren. Who lives in Spain is the non-defining relative clause, and we introduce it with the relative pronoun who. Then we have the second example. My friend John, who went to the same school as me, has just written a best-selling novel. Who went to the same school as me is the non-defining relative clause. And here we have the relative pronoun who. My grandmother, who is dead now, came from the north of England. Okay? Who is dead now is the non-defining relative clause. This is the relative pronoun, and if we remove this non-defining relative clause, it will still make sense. It means that we can say, my grandmother came from the north of England. Example number 4. We stopped at the museum, which we had never visited before. Which we had never visited before is the non-defining relative clause introduced with the relative pronoun which. Then we have example number 5. I've just come back from London, where John lives. Where John lives is a non-defining relative clause introduced with the relative pronoun where. And the last example. Yesterday I met a woman named Susan, whose husband works in London. Okay, this is the non-defining relative clause, and here we have the relative pronoun whose. Relative pronouns. The following relative pronouns are used in non-defining relative clauses. These relative pronouns appear at the start of the non-defining relative clause and refer to a noun that appears earlier in the sentence. It means when we want to talk about a person, we can use the relative pronouns who, or whom, or whose. If we want to talk about a thing, and it is the subject, we're going to use which, and if it's the object, we're going to use which too. And if we're going to talk about a place, and it is the object of the sentence, we're going to use where. Differences with defining relative clauses. In defining relative clauses, the pronouns who, whom, and which are often replaced by that. In non-defining relative clauses, you cannot replace other pronouns with that. You also cannot leave out the relative pronoun in non-defining relative clauses. The pronoun is required, even when it is the object of the verb in the relative clause. In non-defining relative clauses, they are always separated from the rest of the sentence by commas, unlike defining relative clauses, which have no punctuation. Examples. He gave me the letter which was in a blue envelope. This is a non-defining relative clause. We have here the relative pronoun which. Okay? There was only one letter. It happened to the blue one. The second example. He gave me the letter which or that was in a blue envelope. This is a defining relative clause. There were several letters of different colors and he gave me the blue one. Example number 3. He gave me the letter which I read immediately. This is a non-defining relative clause. There was only one letter and which is the object of read, but it must be included in the sentence. Thank you. If you have any questions, here's my Gmail account. Remember to write down everything on your notebooks. Bye.